So we have a jobs page and jobs component now, which lists all the jobs. And I'd like to be able to click on a job to see a details page for that job. Now we've already made a jobs details component, so we should show this component for that page and that route. And so for each of these jobs that we output inside the jobs component right here, each of those should be inside a router link to a job details route. But what would the route for the job details page look like? Well, normally it would follow this kind of structure, /jobs / the ID, where the ID is some kind of identifier of the job that we want to see the details of. For example, it could be /123 after jobs, or /567, where this number is the ID of the job that we want to see. Or it could be something like /web dev job 231, where this would be the ID, or as it's otherwise known, the slug. So the last part of the route would be changeable, but it would always represent the ID of the job that we want to see. And then we'd show the details of that job in the details component, or the job details component in our case. Now, this changeable part of the route is known as a route parameter, and in Vue, we denote route parameters with a colon and then the parameter name. Now, the parameter name can be whatever you want, but a lot of the time you'll see it called ID. So let's see now how to set up route parameters in our application. The first thing we need to do is add in a route for the job details page. So I'm doing that inside the router index file. Inside the routes array at the bottom, create another object for this route. The path is going to be /jobs, and then it's / the route parameter, which I'm going to call ID. Now to create a route parameter, we do a colon, then the parameter name, whatever you want to call it. In our case, it's going to be ID. Then we need a name property, and this is going to be job details. And typically when I create a name, it's always the same as the component name, most of the time anyway. And then we need a component, and for that it's the job details component. We need to also import that, so let me Alt Shift and press down to duplicate this and change this and this to job details. Okay, so now if we save that and go to this route, no matter what the ID is, it could be 1, it could be 10, it could be Yoshi, it doesn't matter, it's going to show this component. So let's go inside this component and flesh it out a little bit. All I'm going to do for now is an H1 which says job details page, like so that we know we've landed on it. So if we go to /jobs /1, we should see the job details page, which we do. Now this up here can be anything. It can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we still get the job details page, or it could be Mario, and we get the job details page. It doesn't matter what this value is. Vue recognizes that it follows the same structure as this route down here, where the thing after the job is changeable, because we said it can be right here, because this is a route parameter, okay? Now, it would be nice if that we could access whatever that parameter is right here inside the job details component, because ultimately we want to show details about that particular job. So we need the ID. So to access that, we can use the route object. So let me do a paragraph tag down here first of all, and I will say the job ID is, and we're going to output a dynamic value, so curly braces, and we can say in here, we want to use the route object. So it's $route. And this object contains information about the current route, including any route parameters like this. So I could say .params to get the route parameters, but then I also need to say whatever the route parameter is called. In our case, it's ID. So it would be .id. But if the parameter was called something else, like slug, we would say .slug here. So it's whatever the route parameter is called for that route, okay? So let's save it. Hopefully now, when we go to this route, we're going to see the actual route parameter or the ID of that job on the page. So let me refresh, and we can see already the job ID is Mario. If I change this to 123, the job ID is 123. Now we can also access this route object right here inside the component object as well. So let me do that. I'm going to set up our data function, which returns an object, and inside here I'm going to say I want an ID property to store the ID of the current job. So we're going to get that from the route object, only this time when we're inside the component object we have to say this to reference the component object first, much like we do for data when we say this dot whatever the data property is. We don't need to say this inside the template, but we always do inside the object of the component. So we say this dot $route and then dot params and then dot ID. So I can now just output ID right here to grab this property, which is the ID from the route parameters. Save that and it's going to do exactly the same thing. Refresh, change this, and we see we get the ID right here. So next up, we're going to look at how to make dynamic router links which can pass route parameters so that when we click on one of these jobs, it goes to the correct URL at the top. For example, this one /1, for the next one /2, etc.